Hi guys, and welcome to the second part of my spriting tutorial. This is shading. So, we are going to shade this guy right here. First, I would get official sprites. That's the first thing I would do, because if you want an official looking Pokemon sprite, it makes sense to be using official colors. I use Dragonfly Cave Sprite Generator. I will link to that in the post in the description, and you guys can use that too. I usually use the randomizer function and try to find a specific Pokemon that I think would work, and then I paste them in a graphic scale. So, how I usually sprite is I start with the darkest shade first, and then I add the lighter shade onto it. So we'll start on this guy with the pop. First thing I should probably mention about black and white style is you really only have two shades on most sprites unless your Pokemon's really shiny and or slimy or something. Two shades per color. With this one I'm probably going to anti-alias the pot because Pinsir has that anti-alias. Anti-alias I will explain once I start doing it. It's one of those words that you kind of just take for granted when you sprite. Once you know what it means, you'll be like, oh, how did I never know that before? Because you see it all the time. I'll actually extend this a bit. I might actually want to add a third shade for this, because this has a pretty large surface area. Either that or I could use the shiny surface trick, which I will also show you. This is the shiny surface trick. It's usually used on like metal. It's where you have like, I wouldn't recommend using it on things that aren't supposed to be shiny, like skin, because then it would just look really bad. But I think I'll add another shade to this. Does Pinsir have another shade? I actually know what I can do. Do that, and then I can add the dark shade. I mean, some Pokemon that have large surface area or are shiny will have more than two shades, and especially a lot of the 4th gen Pokemon, because they didn't actually change their sprites all that much. So, okay, I will explain antialiasing now. This is, one second. Anti-aliasing is when you have little dots or lines between two colors in order to blend them. Like you can see here, I'll zoom in a bit. You can see the dots between the light and the dark shade. That's anti-aliasing. It's used to smooth colors. It's used to, well, mostly to smooth colors and shades. But one thing you shouldn't do, you want to make sure your anti-aliasing looks more like dots rather than lines, because if you're doing something like this, then that's not good. That's called banding, and it makes the sprite look really overwhelmed and kind of gross looking. So with anti-aliasing, you kind of want to do slightly different stuff. Just dots. Trying to nah, I think that I have 3 shades, I can get rid of that. It just doesn't look good on some materials. Like I said, it's mostly for metal and like metal spheres, chrome, those kinds of things. or if you're using two light sources. But alright, so if you notice how all my shading, all my light, the light colors are to the left, to the upper left, that is because my light source is to the upper left, and the light source is what determines where the light is, where like the sun is coming from. So in a with a Pokemon sprites, your light source is always, with these battle sprites, always to the upper left. So it'd be right up here. So I might actually want to cut some more down here. So you can also anti-alias around the outlines. That usually makes a sprite look, the outlines on a sprite look a lot cleaner. Another thing that you should never do is shade. Here, I'll use this as an example. Is use a light source straight from the center, unless you're really experienced, because most beginners, they're like, oh, the light's coming from the center, I'll just do this. And they do it a bunch of times. It's hard to explain them here, but like, the light's coming from the center, okay, I'll do this. And they just do it like this. And that's called pillow shading, and it looks awful. Don't do it, or else people will hate you. See, I can't even do pillow shading right now because I haven't done it in so long. It's bad. Don't do it. Anti-aliasing badly can also lead to pillow shading, but you just gotta be careful with how you anti-alias. If you ever hear someone talking about AAing, that's anti-aliasing. A couple other terms, shading terms I'll cover in here in a minute. Or when I get onto different parts of this. So, that is the pop part. Let's do the body. Another thing that I've learned since I made my last video is not every part of the sprite needs every single shade. This is very, very important. Because otherwise you will end up looking very pillow shaded and bad stuff will happen. Like if you're using 3 shades, I wouldn't want to like clog up one large part of the sprite with 3 different shades. Well, one small part of the sprite. And it's kind of difficult not to clump stuff together in small sprites like this, but you shouldn't be clumping things together. So once again, the light source is coming from the upper left. And I want to make it look like his head is kind of overlapping his neck. Okay. Maybe a little bit more upward. Maybe I want to connect the whole thing. I mean, with shading, sometimes you just have to keep trying until it looks good. I've spent like hours on single sprites just in the shading part. Because it can just be such a huge pain. Yeah, see, this neck is taking a while to look right. Okay, this looks okay. Alright. Do the legs next. A good method if you're doing like a background or something is to not outline first and just to start shading and like in blocks and then to outline. And if you're having trouble with like a certain pose, you can always just make a silhouette and then color it in, which I have done with a lot of my sprites. I like to do outlining first usually because that helps me get the design down, like out of my head and onto the paper or the computer, as it were. I might actually want to add a third shade for this part too, or else it might seem a little unbalanced, but that's just me. I like a lot of shades. I like complex shading, which isn't really the Pokemon way, like I said. Have like 2 colors per thing. It's just 2 per shade, and it's kind of blah, but that's just me. Trying to figure out how I should shade this up here. So I usually like to keep the back leg on quadruped creatures in this sort of pose unshaded, because that's what the official sprites usually do. If you look at like Jolteon or Arceus, they all have their legs unshaded like that. Depending on what pose they're in, that is. But the examples I gave should have unshaded back legs, as far as I remember. I just keep shading until I find the sort of thing that I like, and then I stop. So, Swellow has the other colors. Well, shiny Swellow. Like I said, when I pick stuff out from the TCOD sprite thing, sprite randomizer, I usually try and pick out shinies whenever possible, because their colors are usually different than official sprites, but still recognizable as Pokemon colors. So you're not going to have a Pokemon that looks just like another Pokemon, because the shiny colors will be different, and won't be as known to people, if that makes any sense. People aren't going to instantly recognize, oh, that's shiny Swellow. anti-aliasing a lot here once again. See, does that work? No. Just check how much time I have. Okay, I got like 5 minutes left. That should be enough to finish shading this and possibly shade the outline, which is also a very important part of Sprite. And finally the beak. This is based on like a dinosaur, like bird-like, ostrich-like dinosaur. So and again, the whole thing on the back leg is in the darkest color. Let's save that. Remember to save often, that's important. Next up, outline shading. So in a lot of communities, like Pixel Joint, which I linked to on my last video, this is called sellout for selective outlining. I vaguely remember there being a difference between this sort of sellout and the other kind of, and there's like a different kind of sellout or something, but I know people do call this sellout in some communities. So someone will probably correct me if I get it wrong. So in the places where it's dark, leave it black. In places where it's light, shade it with the lightest color, with the outline color. And there's another neat trick I will show you in a bit. A thing my friend Twitch taught me, you should try and shade on a dark background when you shade the outlines, because then you can see how they look on a dark background. A lot of websites use dark backgrounds, like Cerebi. Poke Community currently has a light background, but you never know when they're going to change theirs again, you know? Okay, that's shaded. The orange, sometimes if you use all your shades, like I have with the beak and the claws, you can just make another one. Remember to shift your color slider over to the side. That's called hue shifting, and it's really important when you're making your own colors, because you don't just want your sprites to just be like all the colors in real life aren't like all orange. Orange isn't all orange. It has shades of red in it, and red isn't all red. It'll have shades of purple. I mean, depending on what the color is, it's gonna have shades of something else. So you kind of want to mimic that to make your sprite look good. There's not really much for me to say that I haven't already covered, so Another thing, if you have extra shades of like one color, just use them for the eyes, because you want to have a colored iris, and most like bigger Pokemon eyes have irises, and they're usually colored like slightly differently than the actual Pokemon. Let's see, is any of these a good example? No, these don't have irises, but most larger eyes do. So let us grab Exeggutor's outline color. Yeah, I can't reiterate how useful it is to use real Pokemon colors. It just makes your sprites look a lot more official. The outline of the eye is usually slightly shaded to make it blend in a little more. Sometimes all shaded. Another nice feature of Graphic Scale, if you haven't already downloaded it, is right-click color dropper. So useful. Yeah, that's why spriting on a black background makes, well, not a black background, but a dark background makes it a lot easier to see your mistakes when you outline. I'll just shade that in there. Sometimes might even want to do this, but not, yeah, I'll do it in this case, is to use your outline color as the back legs color. Then you'll need to make the outline next to the back leg black, but that's not really a big deal. And finally, Swellow's outline shade. Sometimes it can be a little hard to find. And sometimes the outline shade only looks kind of bad and you want some black in there. Because all color outlines are really a pet peeve of mine, they just don't look good. actually going to edit the shading here a bit. No, it doesn't look good. Not sure what I'm going to do here. Okay, that looks fine. On some outline shades, you can do something called like dots or whatever, where you kind of do like dots, like lines at the edges of outlines at the edges of the other outlines, like that. But on some outlines, it just looks really bad and really choppy. So I would recommend, again, doing it on a dark background and making sure you have the right type of outline to do that with. It's usually the colors that make them look bad. Like if the outline shade's really light. Need more black on that one. Should be on here. See, the dot effect looks pretty awful. But in some places you have to do it. Yeah, it looks okay. Okay. Alright. I think this is almost done. The last thing we want to do is we want to look for patches of the lightest shade, and then only the lightest shade, and then we can add in the darker not outline shade to it, and it'll make it look a lot more like even. It's hard to explain, but you can see I'm adding the darker body shade to certain places on the body and outline of the body. And again, there are places where the dots look awful. That looks okay. It's a lot easier to do this on sprites with 3 shades per color, but you can still do it on these kinds of sprites. You can even do it on slightly darker shades, and everything will look great. If you do it right, that is. Excuse me. Let's see. Sometimes you have to remove the anti-aliasing to get this kind of thing to work. And that's okay in some parts of the sprite. And again, don't try to cram too many shades into one space. That's not a good idea. Alright, and I think he's done. Let's see actually how would it look without that. That's fine, actually. That's cool without that one shade. So, that's how you shade a sprite. And tune in next time for the next tutorial, which will probably be design or something similar. And have a good night.